Hey there, folks. So, the last couple episodes we were going through and we were fixing up our to do list. And from that, we're just clearing off some of the many sort of like comments I'd added in to fix this, adjust that, things like that. We didn't completely finish that list, obviously, as you can see. Some of those were things like we're waiting on other components to be finished. Other ones are things I'm still trying to decide how I want to do, such as the side effects for complex needs. We've got things like alternate to having a tick on the inventory component. And then a few other things like with the AI, when its flee action is called, finding that point that it can flee to, making sure it gets a valid one. So I also said I wasn't sure what the next episode was going to be. For anyone who's observant enough, obviously you're going to be able to tell I'm looking at doing the equipment system. So that is where we are going to get started today. Now, before we start diving into the code, one thing I wanted to go over, and I understand it's not code work, but it's part of the game design stuff that I'm working on, so it's going to get documented. Right here we have what was the... So I was cleaning this up so I can work on it. The equipable class breakdown that I had done a couple episodes back here. And I've been... This is where I was struggling on how I wanted to do this. And for that, let me explain. My plan is here. I'll put a new empty layer over this. This is what we're looking at here. Primarily because ammo, it's literally just a data class. Actually, I might even just do this. But anyway, so we're looking at the weapon and its sub-child items. And with that, actually, I'm going to get rid of one of these arrows because I don't need this in here. I was trying to think, how am I going to handle things like, for anyone familiar with 7 Days to Die, and I believe it was Alpha 20 and before, things like glass jars that you can use to scoop up water and things like that, or buckets. And again, that was something that was in 7 Days to Die. Both of those were there and they've got removed. Or for anyone who's familiar with Project Zomboid, you have a huge number of containers, but in there you have the isometric view with a right-click context menu, which is not something I'm intending because this is a first-person, third-person, so the cursor's not always on display and things like that. So I was trying to think, how do I go about having a container for liquid? And I was sitting here and I was thinking, okay, well, let's drop this back down to 2 pixels for a second. I was thinking, okay, well, we've got our container here, which is a child of the clothing, but that's for things like backpacks or webbing, if you've got military, and if you have an idea, that's the pouches and stuff that you can wear over your bulletproof vest, things like that. But either way, instead of getting sidetracked, you have this here, but that's an inventory container. That's not something that has a liquid capacity. And that's predominantly what I've been trying and fighting with for the last little while is how would I do a glass jar that has the ability to hold a set amount of liquid and determine what liquid's in there, because you could have a glass jar that's full of water, full of gasoline, full of bleach, full of paint, like all these different things that you could put in there. And that's ultimately what I was struggling with. And actually it was the first attempt at recording this episode in the initial talking part where it clicked in my head on how to do that. And my plan here is, let's go to a slightly different blue and make it a little lighter, is I want to extend that to include a child of the ranged item that is going to be Let me just get this put in here. Sorry, I'm just typing this out quickly, and the way my brain works, I don't want to type and talk because I will type what I'm saying. So what I want to do here is I want to, and it may not make any sense, so I'll explain that, but I want to extend a child class of a ranged item that is going to be the liquid containers. Now, let me explain why I've decided to go this way. So weapons, as we've got here, and I don't have all my notes in because typing in Krita sucks. Need a better way for that. But anyway, so we're going to have our weapon class, which is extended as a child of our equipable. And that's going to include things like a handiness and a base damage. And that's going to be something that's applied to melee and ranged. It's not documented in here, but I'm also going to have a primary action and a secondary action for a weapon class. And what that is going to be is that's going to be like the with a rifle, for example, or a ranged weapon. You've got your secondary action, which would be look down the sights, and your primary action, which would be pull the trigger. Or for a melee weapon, you'll have your primary action is swing, your secondary action is block. Or, again, taking 7 days to die as an example, it's a power attack. I'm not going that route, I'm just using that as an explanation. So melee weapons are going to have a primary and a secondary. Ranged weapons are going to have a primary and secondary. The one thing that ranged weapons have that melee don't is they're going to have a ammunition capacity. And I was thinking, well, we could just leverage that ammunition capacity for reference to how much is stored within the container, the liquid container. Primary and secondary action obviously can be pour out or drink or fill, all depending on what's going on. So ultimately, and I understand I've taken like 8 minutes now to get to this point, but ultimately this is what I was struggling with and what was holding up getting this episode moving forward. And I wanted to cover and go through this and sort of explain some of this information before we sort of started diving in to code work and things like that, because this was the holdup, is how do I want to do liquid containers? And from there, how do we implement that at a code level? And that was the big one that was holding me up is, okay, I want to have a liquid container. Where in this structure do I want to have it extend off? Because like you could have it extend, like one of my original thoughts is between equipable and weapon, throw in another class which was handheld. So you could say, okay, you have handheld, which are weapons or non-weapons. And then you could have the non-weapon section have all of this stuff. And then I was thinking, well, no, I don't need to do that. And that's actually what clicked in the first attempt at recording this was, well, all of the logic we need for a liquid container exists within like these, I'm going to vector layer, that's why, these two classes right here. So I don't need to reinvent the wheel, create a new class. I can use this pre-existing logic that's going to be on these two classes and just have a subclass of range. So with that, I'm going to move this out of the way and we're going to start looking at some things here and how we want to go about that. So first and foremost, we have our equipable item base. And this is what we just had in that screenshot. This is where we have our skeletal mesh. We have our is equipped flag, and we have our slot type, and we have some basic code for that. I made this all a header only class, didn't I? Nope. So I'm going to quickly clean that up. So now this is something that for people who aren't 100% up to speed with C++, that you can do what's called a header only class. And instead of having this information here in a source file, everything's in the header. And what that would mean is any other class that includes this header reference, like include items, equipable item base.h, it's going to know about all of it, and it's going to have this code. So it's sort of well, that's the same as that define the force inline. Basically, it's saying copy this code into your own code so that it's all in one place. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. So what I've done here, though, is I've got a class that's sort of half header, half source file, because get slot, get character mesh, they're in the source. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just move these both into the header. So get that done quick, and it's going to be return slot type. So we can get rid of this one. Because we don't even need that. And then let's return character mesh on get equipable mesh. Because again, we don't need character mesh. If I could spell. We're not doing any data processing or anything like that. This class is purely for data access, nothing else. Well, not even data access. It's for storing that information. We're not doing any logic processing on that, with the exception of this one function that I'm looking at right here, which is setting it up for if it's equipped. And ultimately, like, none of this is equipped. Return is equipable. Sorry. This is not an issue. So we can go through and get rid of this as well. And this just helps clean things up so that the source file is really not needed. Now, in here, there's a couple of things. Well, actually, in here, there's actually nothing else we want to do. But we need to look at some of this in our weapon item base. First things first is going to be this slot type. I don't want this to be set as a, I don't want to say null value, but it's not initialized. And if we go, this is going to leave a default option there, and I don't want that on a equipment item base because it's not intended as a actually right here this needs to change blueprintable blueprint type, but it's not intended for this. This is just a data class. It's not intended to be used. This is where it should be an abstract class. My brain doesn't want to work. I'm pretty sure that's the one. It cannot be used directly. It's like, this is purely to be parented. But one of the things we can do with that is over in our weapon item base, we can give it a constructor. Now, let me just throw these in here because we're now writing some code, protected and public. Now, you can do private, protected, public if you want. This is for anyone who hasn't been following along in series. I do this for my own personal organization, and then I know which sections are which. But as for the constructor, I'm actually going to throw it down as a public constructor. Do I want public? No, I'm going to make it a protected, because then we can call it from any child class, but we don't have the ability to modify it. Can't call it from any other classes. So I may change that and may become public. I'm not sure, but we're going to create the definition for that. And the main reason for that is I want to do this. What this is doing here is it's any class that's derived from the U weapon item base by default is getting its slot type set to a weapon, because in that way we don't have to worry about accidentally missing it. And at the same time, we're going to want to do that with our clothing item base. So, no, I don't know, actually, clothing item base, default. Actually, I will do that there as well. So I was just trying to think, because we have multiple different clothing items, but we'll do that here as well. And this is just to give it a default value if it is derived for the blueprint that is derived from this particular class. So we're going to throw that on here, and slot type equals equipment slot legs by default. All right, we can get rid of clothing item base here though. Now back to our weapon stuff. We're gonna bring back my little critter diagram here, so you can in here you can see we have handiness, damage, and then we have some additional information down here. Handiness and damage are two pretty much two fairly simple ones we can add in right here. So in our private section, no, we want this to be protected, because again, we're going to be deriving from this. So it's going to be U property, edit defaults only, blueprint read only, meta equals allow private access equals true, and tooltip equals this. I'm going to leave that blank because I'm going to copy this here. And we want to go float base damage. And the reason being for this is there's going to be damage modifiers. So you could think of, with a melee weapon, you're going to have strength modifier. Your as a character, a stronger character is going to be able to swing a baseball bat and cause more damage than a weaker character. Or you're going to have, say, take a rifle. It's got multiple different types of, I'm just going to pick an arbitrary 5.56 round. There's multiple different types of 5.56 you can use, and they're going to have different damage modifiers. So some, let's say, subsonic rounds, they're not going to have as much damage, but they're going to make less noise. There's a bunch of other factors to account for in there. So that is a pretty basic one there. Now for handiness, we're actually going to want to set that up as an enum. So what we're going to need to do here, we're going to do a quick build. I did a build just before we started this episode just to make sure, double check everything I did in the last couple episodes still worked, had no issues with it. So we're going to do a build here. Yeah, expecting that one. All right, we're going to hop into the editor. And with that, we are going to just go through and create a basic enum. Now, I've covered that in pretty much every episode. So what I'm going to do, just for the sake of time, because we're already at 20 minutes and I want to sort of try and make some progress with this episode, I'm going to pause the video here and I'm going to come back once we've made that specific data type for the handiness enum. Alright, so I went through and I created the basic enum, and I just went through and did the normal setup. I cleared out the source file so there's nothing in there, and set up the header with the basic information that we're going to start with. And that's just the initial declaration, the brain's not wanting to work, the decorator for the enum with the blueprint type attribute, and then setting up the enum class handiness based off of uint8. Now, we would want to go through and we're going to set up our handiness there. So it's going to be H for handiness underscore left, H underscore right, and H underscore both. But anyway, so we've just gone through and we set up some basics here. Right now there's a complaint of doesn't have a 0 entry, so we're going to do that. I'm going to go 0 equals 1 and equals 2. That'll get rid of this once IntelliSense catches up. And the other thing we're going to want to do is add that UMeta display that we have on our other ones. So we're going to copy that from our core stat in this case. And we're just going to tuck that in neatly here on all of these. Put a space in there. And then we're going to go... Actually, and there's a fourth one we need. Left. Right. Both. Or H underscore either. And it's going to be our third entry. And our UMeta for that is going to be either. And just to run through what these are for. This is, obviously, it's only goes in your left hand, only goes in your right hand, requires both hands to use, so that's a two-handed weapon, so think a rifle or, well, you could use a pool cue as an example. You'd want to use two hands for that. Then you have either, which is going to be, I just thought there's a fifth one we want to add in here. Either means it can go in your left hand or your right hand. And then I'm not sure how to name this one, but we'll go back to, say, a baseball bat, for example. By default, you're going to be able to use left hand, right hand, both hands for that. So it's going to be left, right, both. Well, so in that case, it would be both or either. And I don't know if I want to call that multi or universal. I think I'm going to go for multi. And this is going to be our fifth option in there. We're going to throw our UMeta in and I'm going to call that combination. And I can't spell multi right? I put mullet. So we have our handiness in there. So that gives us that. And that's our basic setup here. And from there, we can get rid of our source and our header file. We don't need to worry about those again. So we need to obviously add that in here. And I've found from past experience, we can't just declare it as an enum. We actually need to add that include here. So we're going to go include data type handiness. So with that, we're going to copy over our U property from our base damage, and then it's going to go E handiness, weapon handiness, and we're going to say that is going to be E handiness. I'm going to default everything to just the right hand. So now there is a couple other things we're going to want to do in here. We need to add in what, as I mentioned, our primary action and our secondary action. But because we want to expose this to blueprints, because this is going to be a blueprint stuff that deals with that, we're going to need to make sure they are blueprint accessible to override. So what we need to do here is U function blueprint native event, and then these are going to be virtual void primary action, and then we need to obviously expand that to be implementation. Is that the right one? Let me look at a player character here. For anyone wondering, I suck when it comes to spelling. I do have a mild form of dyslexia, so You may have picked that up based on how horrible my spelling is with a lot of things. Yep, that was right. Must be non-virtual. Okay, so get rid of that. And then we're going to want a secondary one, which is going to be void secondary action. And we're going to repeat what we had there, virtual void second, is that? Oh, that's just because we don't have them declared. Secondary action. Copy that over. So, what are you complaining? Yeah, it's non-virtual. Or are you complaining about that one? Let's get rid of that and see if that fixes that error. Now what we're going to want to do here though is include logger.h, and the reason being for this is these base implementations, yeah, it just hasn't updated, so I'm going to put that back to virtual. So these base implementations, oh wow, I cannot spell, are going to be, well, really all we're going to do here is we're just going to add a log error message. So logger get instance add message error level critical, because we're calling a function that doesn't exist. Primary we'll set that up with primary action not defined, and we're going to do the same thing for secondary action not defined. Now what we could do is, and this is something I'm going to deal with offline because I'm not 100% sure on how to do it, and it could take me quite some time to figure out, is I actually want to go through and add in the class name. So we could be like BP underscore shotgun 01. So we could actually add that in there, so it's easier when you're looking at your logs to identify where the problem is. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time off camera figuring that out, and we'll cover that in the next episode. But in here, this gives us our basic setup, and I'm just going to ignore that. So I'm going to run a build while I keep talking, just to see if we can get that error to go away. So what we've done here is we've set up the very basics for our weapon class, which is something that would be held in the hands of the character. Now, obviously, we need to... Excuse me. Sorry, I just had a cough there. We can see, sorry, just quickly to sidetrack, we can see build succeeded, so this is no longer an issue. This is perfectly fine the way we have these set up. So with that though, I was going to say we have our primary action, our secondary action, and then we have the functionality, well not functionality, we have our handiness and our base damage. And this is, if I pull up Crita again here, just draw that over, the basics of what we had in here. And that gives us this class here. And next episode, because we are hitting that 30-minute mark, I'm going to start work on the melee class, and that'll include getting things set up so we can actually start attaching things to the character and potentially playing animations and things like that. So with that though, folks, as I said, we're coming up on that 30-minute mark, so I'm going to end things off here. I do understand, again, we're not making much visible progress, but this portion of the equipment is a lot of just raw code and data before we can start getting back into the editor and start doing more visually accomplishing things. And that's things like setting up so that the baseball bat attaches to the player's hand so that they can swing and things like that. So with that though, folks, what I'm going to do, I'm going to end things here as I said. So if there's any comments, questions, concerns, suggestions, as always, please feel free to leave them in the comments below, or feel free to jump over onto the Discord and ask some questions there. I try to respond as quick as possible. But anyways, folks, thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode.